Hello and welcome to this STEM tutorial video. This video is designed to help you and your team design a STEM challenge unit from scratch. Oakcliff already has quite a number of STEM challenge units. If you go into the Outlook Oakcliff STEM group, you will find them under the Challenge Units folder. But we don't want to keep recycling the same units over and over again, so there will probably come a time where you and your team are going to have to design a STEM challenge unit. The first thing we need to talk about, though, is what exactly is a STEM challenge unit? What components does it need to have in order to qualify as a STEM challenge unit? At Oakcliff, a STEM challenge unit is what we call our larger STEM challenges that align with our standards and the county pacing guide. So these units are often between 6 to 10 weeks long, although that really kind of depends on what standard you choose to base them on. For example, if you base them on the science standard of life cycles, and that standard on the county pacing guide is intended to be taught over an 8-week period, then your STEM challenge unit will be for an 8-week period. But this can be flexible because we're including all 4 subject areas. So while we may have finished up our social studies unit according to the pacing guide, we may still be in our language arts unit that's a part of this. So you kind of have to, as a team, decide just how long your challenge unit's going to be. But it is aligned with the CAG, at least to some extent. That's the County Curriculum at a Glance guide. So a STEM challenge unit, in order to qualify, must have a real-world problem at its heart. The reason I clarify that it must be real-world is because, for example, one year we really wanted to align them to our Fables unit, and we were doing folktales about the 3 little pigs, and the kids wanted to build houses that the big bad wolf couldn't blow down. And unfortunately, that's a fantasy situation. That's not a real-world situation. But oftentimes, they can still be adapted. So for that unit, we changed that into what could Native Americans who live in the Southeast, which are prone to hurricanes, what kind of a shelter could they build that could withstand hurricane winds? And that aligned to our 3 Little Pigs story, but it was a real-world example of that. STEM challenge units also must be cross-curricular and must include content and activities from all 4 subject areas. They also must culminate in some kind of a build, and I put that in quotation marks because a build does not necessarily mean a physical project. A build could be a website. A build could be an animated video. A build could be a game or an app that they design. So oftentimes it is an actual physical prototype of whatever their invention is, but it can be something that's digital or even something like a bulletin board that's interactive in the classroom or something like that. So now that we know what is included in a STEM unit, let's talk about how to get started designing one. STEM units should be designed collaboratively with as many stakeholders as possible. At a minimum, this would include your full grade level team, but you might also want to consider including a parent representative, a community partner, or an education partner. Many of the partners that we're going to ask to be a part of this should be included from the beginning. A lot of times a partner can offer things when they hear what we're trying to do in the planning phase. They can offer things that they're capable of helping us with that we might not have even realized. So it's really great to have them in from the get-go. Education partners, like some of the universities that we work with, are also really great to have in the planning phase because they can offer insights that we may not think of. At any rate, you're going to begin with the standard and the pacing guide. In Dekalb County, we call this the CAG, the Curriculum at a Glance guide. Your team is going to look at all the standards that you're going to teach during the time frame that we're talking about and brainstorm problems that could go along with these standards. Science is often a good base, but many excellent units have been based off of other subject areas. As you look at each standard, think about what the people who are affected by that standard, what their lives are like, or what are some problems that they may have. For example, if we're going to do life cycles, well, where do we see life cycles of animals or plants affecting people? Well, our garden at Oakcliff is a great place to begin, but we could also look at agriculture, we could look at food services. There are lots of places we could look where people might have problems that have to do with the life cycles of plants and animals. A good rule of thumb, though, is to keep this relevant for our students. So start looking in the classroom, then expand to the school, and maybe expand to our local community. And finally, if you still haven't found a problem that you think they could work with, we can go to the larger population as a whole. It can be a little tricky figuring out a real-world problem that our kids can relate to that also align to the standards that we're trying to teach. So I've placed some slides at the very end of this presentation that give you some more specific suggestions for trying to find problems. But a good brainstorm where everybody sits around and tosses out some problems, and then eventually we find one that most folks can relate to, or when the ideas start flowing, oh, hey, if we do that, we could include this from math, and oh, hey, that would fit in with what we're doing with social studies. A lot of times a problem comes up that you find that everybody kind of latches onto and works really well. Now that you have your real-world problem, we're going to look at the standards for all of the subject areas and determine what activities can be taught during this time frame that will align well with our problem. For example, if you based your unit on a science standard, you're going to look at what are you writing during this time. Is it informational? Is it narrative? Is it persuasive? So maybe we're going to write a story about a seedling that has to go through its life cycle. Or maybe we're going to write a persuasive letter to the PTA to ask them to fund our project. Or maybe we're going to ask partners to join us. Perhaps we're going to create an informational website that explains what we're doing and why we're doing it. You can also look at a lot of your grammar and writing conventions. This is a great place to put those in. Maybe you're teaching sentence structure and you want to teach them how to write a good paragraph. Well, they could write a paragraph that's a reflection on what they did on their STEM unit today. All of these things can then be taught as a part of your STEM unit, and the instruction for that and the writing itself should go in the STEM notebook. Sometimes you may need to include standards that are a bit out of order from the pacing guide, and that's okay. You don't want to go too crazy because we still need to answer to the pacing guide, but in STEM schools we have to shuffle things around just a little bit. Whatever you do, please be sure that every subject area has enough skills and activities that belong in the STEM unit so that you can always be in a STEM unit and not, we were in STEM for the first week, but now for the rest of the 6 weeks, we don't have anything left to do that's considered to be the STEM unit. So now you know what the activities are from each subject area and the standards that you're going to teach that align. It's time to find the content that you have to teach to go with these. So for example, if in 5th grade, we're working with classification and we're looking at classifying species, the Chisholm Trail, or the Great Western Cattle Trails, is what we have to teach during the social studies time frame. Well, our science engaging scenario was about invasive species coming into the garden. So a little searching online, we found that the Great Western Cattle Trails had a problem with invasive species of a tick traveling on the cows. And so we were able to nicely tie that in with the unit. In any case, you need to line up what content needs to be taught in every subject area that's going to be considered a part of the unit. Now that you've determined your content and your activities, it's time to look for the partners and experts that you'll need to help you with this unit. Finding partners can seem a bit challenging, but it's not too bad once you get into it. Start searches online. See if you can find what organizations in the area deal with whatever the problem is that you've chosen. Send a note home to your parents. You might be surprised that some of our parents may have an expertise in that area. Consult with your colleagues and check with the STEM team. There are partners out there that want to help. It's time to get ready to teach in your class. You have to determine what materials and resources you're going to need. First, you need to know what the constraints are. What are the rules for the build? How will they know if they're successful? How will they know if their design worked? What will they measure success by? Do they know what your expectations are for this unit? Rubrics are very useful here, and we highly encourage rubrics for any content area activity so that children always know what's expected of them. A lot of times I've had kids that I thought understood what was expected because I told them, and then when somebody comes into the room to ask, they really can't share it. So it's really great if they have a written rubric in front of them that they can refer to. What materials are you going to need? Do you need to send a note home to parents asking them to send materials in? Do you need to ask a partner to donate materials? A great way to include language arts skills in your STEM unit is to have the children write the notes that have to go home to the parents for the supplies, or ask the children to write a persuasive letter to a potential partner asking them to donate. You also want to be sure that you have enough reading material that aligns with the unit so that you can include your reading standards in your STEM unit. What books do we have in the Media Center? There are a bunch of science and social studies books in the book room. And don't forget our teacher-created materials science readers, the red boxes that every grade level chair should have. We already talked a little bit about rubric for determining the criteria for success, but it's important to plan ahead for what do you do if a child meets the criteria for success on the first build. Well, we still want them to have to improve their design. So be sure that you leave room, or you've thought about ways that a child who is successful on the first try can continue to improve. For example, if we're building earthquake-proof buildings, and I set up a criteria where it has to survive on a shake table for 1 minute, and their building survives just fine, okay, what if I shake the table harder? Or what if I shake the table longer? Does it still survive? You can always put a budget in place. Okay, you built it great and it's successful. Now, can you build it using fewer materials or on a lower budget? No matter what, please make sure they always have time for their final improves. You never want to leave a child with failure. Some kids may not ever be completely successful. In other words, it may not meet the final criteria for success, but at least if they see improvement, they'll walk away from it feeling confident. Now that you have everything in place, it's time to lay out your pacing. Be sure that you sketch out where all of your activities are going to fall so that you can get it all in. Most importantly, make sure you leave time for the final improve. So start to lay out for each content area how much time will you need for them to master the requisite skills that they'll need for this unit. When will they begin the build? Some builds won't start until the end of the content. Some builds will start right away and progress throughout the entire time. When will your partners be needed? When you ask for partners, it's a really great idea to already have lined out what they're going to need to do. How much time will they need to give, and on what days and when, because they're busy people and they have to align this with their calendars before they can commit to joining us. Do you have enough activities for every subject area to be included in the unit throughout the time period that your unit is going to run? It's time to get started teaching. Be sure to introduce the question or problem at the very beginning of the unit before you even start teaching any content. The whole idea behind a STEM unit is that children are learning the content in order to solve a problem. This is what helps them be engaged. Finally, a few last things to remember. STEM is always going on in our classrooms. It's not just on Fridays. It's not just during the build phase. It's always going on. Now, there may be days where someone were to walk in your room and you're teaching a whole group grammar lesson, or maybe you're having them practice multiplication skills. We won't necessarily see STEM going on at that time. But when we look around the room, we should see that it's obviously been happening daily. I should see work on the boards. I should see vocabulary words. I should be able to open their STEM notebooks and see that regularly there is some kind of activity in the STEM notebook that has to do with the subject area that you teach. And speaking of the STEM notebooks, students should always have them with them, ready to use. They shouldn't be in backpacks. They shouldn't be in the other classroom. They shouldn't be, well, we don't need that because we only use those on Friday. Make sure that they're regularly using those STEM notebooks. Now, of course, if they're just doing math or language drills or practice, that does not go in the STEM notebook, even if it is tied to the unit. For example, if they're going to use multiplication to create an invoice for materials at the end of their unit, they may need to learn how to do multiplication to do that. So that lesson will go in the STEM notebook, but if you give them 20 practice problems, that doesn't go in the STEM notebook. The point of the STEM notebook is for it to be a reference for the students to go back to when they need the skills to complete the tasks of the unit. If they have to rummage through page after page of practice work, it's going to make it hard for them to find the information they need. That's also why the table of contents is pretty important. Hopefully this clears things up for you. At the end, I've got some slides here that maybe will help you come up with some problems to go with various types of standards. This is by all means not an inclusive list. There are lots of problems that you can find that go along with your standards. It can be a little tricky in changing your thinking about how you look at them to find those problems, but given enough time, you'll get used to it. In the meantime, here are just a few suggestions. I hope you found this video helpful. Best of luck to you in designing your challenges. Thanks for watching.